Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. I'm Jon Rooney. I'm a landscape architect at Arup based in Cambridge, and I'm chair of Landscape East, a forum that Arup has set up with Natural England to champion landscape planning across the region. Today we're tackling a crucial question. How can a landscape-led approach drive growth and support urban regeneration? If you were lucky enough to make it to the Mayor's keynote speech this morning, you will have heard about his ambitious vision to triple the size of the region's economy by 2050. There's often concern that rapid growth results in generic places which are devoid of character and nature. But in this session, you're going to hear how well-planned and designed development can create communities where people are attracted to settle, work and invest. And with the right vision, expertise and resources, development that celebrates and thrives. I'm really pleased to be joined this morning by four excellent speakers. And I'm going to introduce you to them now, and then we're going to launch into some questions. Directly to my right is Rebecca Britton. She's Director of Communities and Partnerships at Urban and Civic. And she's known for her collaborative work on major developments across Cambridgeshire, including Alconbury Weald, Waterbeach and Wintringham. She's also a trustee for Natural Cambridgeshire and has been influential in the development of the local nature recovery strategy for Cambridgeshire. Next to Rebecca is Sarah Greenwood, Assistant Director of Sustainability and Design at Homes England. She focuses on innovative, sustainable development across a diverse portfolio of projects within the National Technical Hub. To her right is Jennifer Dixon, a Director at Faraday Pollard, a REBA Council member and Chair of the Practice and Policy Committee. She's an architect, urban designer, and she's renowned for her work on landscape-led regeneration, high-quality urban spaces, including Cambridge South Station. And finally, Carolin Göhler. She's the President of the Landscape Institute and former CEO of the Civic Society, Cambridge Past, Present and Future. As well as previous roles at National Trust in the East of England, she was also instrumental in the development of Cambridge's green space strategy. I'm going to start with a simple question. I'd like, Carolin, if you can come to this one first. What does a landscape-led approach mean in practice?
Yes, it's a really, really good question. And for us, it really means bringing a chartered landscape architect early into the game when you do master planning. And to really develop any site, because we as professionals, we liaise with architects, ecologists, engineers, and so on. And it's a way where you can actually bring together all the sort of critical aspects you need to deliver on a site, like nature or biodiversity net gain, what we call also the green-blue infrastructure, community needs, and so much more. And we are sort of a profession where we can actually look at the land in many ways and work out where best to place some of the needs for a piece of land, and whether it's master planning for initial use, but also long sort of approaches. And we also come obviously with a management knowledge in the background as well. So we feel always if you bring in chartered landscape architects early, you actually save money along the route. You get quicker planning permission. You get sites which have greenery really well incorporated and maximized, I would say. You also, can sell properties quicker. When I talk to developers like Berkeley Homes or Urban and Civic and so on, and they just say it's a no-brainer. If you have green space and greenery already there right from the start, people want to live in these places. And if they can also see there's management behind it, then they really value it and also pay more for it. I think it's really essential. And we all want quality. I don't know, we all have property gardens and balcony boxes, and so should the rest of the population have that as well.
Thank you. And Rebecca, from a developer's perspective, might have to point that way. Same question to you, please.
I think it's such an interesting topic from a developer's perspective. I think for our experience, landscape-led, not just can it must ensure good growth for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. What that means for us, I think, is making sure when you move into an area, if you're looking at land assembly, you do it from that strategic point of view. Obviously, our experience is doing big strategic super sites, so you really can make a difference. A lot of that's looking at existing assets, making sure you protect, retain and enhance those around them, but also looking at what the kind of key priorities are for habitat, for species in the local area. There's so much knowledge and expertise. We work closely with local authorities, with the Wildlife Trust. New creation of landscape will take time to really deliver some of the benefits for nature, but getting that design right, getting that connection right so that you are doing bigger, better, more joined up as a fundamental of a place is really key. And critically, as we've said, it's about nature, but it's also about climate resilience, designing in subsystems that can deliver things, making sure that you've got your active travel routes so that actually people are you're doing active design from a health and wellbeing principles as well. These are all key to delivering sustainable places, sustainable growth, and also taking communities with you and making them love the places around them.
Thank you. And Jennifer, from an architect's perspective.
Oh, thanks, John. So for me, yes, I'm an architect, but we have an architecture and landscape practice for a reason. We work mostly in infrastructure, but landscape is infrastructure. It's not just sewers and roads. And for me, it's having the landscape discipline up there at the top table in the early stages with not only the architects, but I have to say it's fundamentally a civil engineering-led environment when you're doing very large regeneration projects. And the three-way partnership between civil engineering, money's in the ground, architecture and landscape in sort of way upstream on the project can unlock incredible dividends. Now, depending on the nature of the project, any one of those three disciplines can be leading the narrative at any point. Forget the contract and the rest of it. On the just from our project experience, for example, on the Tideway Tunnel, nobody could say that's not a civils-led project, but having and that was led by Jacobs, but having Arup Landscape and Faraday Pollard Architecture up there at the top table back in 2008 has some fantastic dividends for communities down the line. So I would say really it's having landscape at the top table with the architects and civil engineers from the beginning, finding where the community value is.
Thanks very much. And Rebecca, where have you seen, in Cambridgeshire in particular, investment in the landscape directly unlock economic and social value?
Well, of course, I would start with our sites generally, but I do think for us it is a key point that one of the things we looked at when we were looking at creating our Cambridge Enterprise Campus was that whilst there's a lot of focus on what community and health would need for the residents, actually what the business side we wanted to do was look at something like Cambridge Biomedical Campus, like the Science Park, where you were creating a landscape setting for businesses. So rather than be a business park, you're actually connecting places that people work and places that they live, opportunities to go for a lovely run at lunchtime, opportunities to sit out and enjoy things, and really thinking about how modern businesses and their workforce, what's important to them, what matters, what helps retain and attract the skills and talents that they need, particularly in some of the areas that aren't necessarily the honeypot of Cambridge, but do require a bit of a transformational sense of place and self to really drive investment and support businesses to grow. So I think there are good examples of what we're trying to do, but that is based on the learning that happened in really successful business locations.
Thank you. And Sarah, from a sort of broader Homes England perspective, are there any good case studies that you could point to that would help in respect to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and their plans?
I think there are some amazing examples out there, and specifically on landscape-led, I think one of the challenges that we face is we still don't really understand what landscape-led is, so it's really good that we open this conversation with what landscape-led is. For me, it's about starting a site with the landscape there, and landscape, we don't just mean the green spaces, we need everything in between and the existing communities, so that's your starting point. And then thinking about how you generate value from that and what is value. So economic growth is a value, but social value is a value as well. So for us, I'm not going to name any specific examples because I don't want to be held account, but there are some amazing schemes out there. And I think what we need to do is really embed value in a very different way. So thinking from the outset, how does the landscape-led approach generate the value that we need for the society, for the local community, for the economy, and for the people that are going to live in here, but the environment as well?
Okay, and are there any specific investments that you would point to as being, not necessarily naming specific projects, but different types of, for example, green blue infrastructure which have really been supportive of unlocking that sort of investment?
And I think, well, I'm going to point to Urban and Civic actually, and some of the stuff that Urban and Civic have been doing, because we hold you in high regard for some of the work that you've been doing across your schemes and how you manage to integrate the infrastructure in that's needed, and how you engage with the local communities that are needed. So up in Alconbury and Houghton and places like that.
Thanks very much. Moving on to a different question. We know that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and the other towns and cities are beautiful, attractive places. How can we accommodate this level of planned growth and investment without losing what makes them special in the first place? Carolin, would you like to start?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, it's always been Cambridge, the quality. It's got not just what I call a national quality, it's of international importance in a way, and that attracts massively investment. And I think we shouldn't forget it. And it's about the beauty, it's about the quality of life people have, whatever they do in the city, and the other cities, Peterborough and the countryside and so on. And I think we need to deliver really quality, and because that's what the basis for me, the economics in the Cambridgeshire area is all about. If you don't deliver quality, I think you will lose the investment long term. Yes, what do we need to look about? We need to cherish our historic environment. I'm really pleased to have been involved with the green infrastructure strategy. Certainly it was the first time ever, some 20 years ago now, things were coming together. We are now actually looking at much more closely, and when developments happen or discussions, that actually this is one of the first parameters to incorporate and make sure that we actually enhance what we've got. And I think it's a sort of general pride we all as professionals should have, that when we work together, we can actually deliver the quality. So for me, the landscape-led is all about unlocking sort of values for nature, value for people and the community, but also it's about the commercial value. I'm not sitting here and just be passionate about landscape and sort of naive about it. I have run businesses, and even charities are businesses. You need to make sure the pennies go in the right direction. And I'm a very strong believer, and I've heard this also from those who've practiced it, that if you bring in and think landscape first and really maximize the quality of the soft landscape, and I agree, landscape is everything. It's architecture, it's infrastructure, and all the different things a piece of land has to make happen. You actually deal with things much more efficiently right from the start, and also have a consensus with all the people involved, all the consultants, the policymakers, the decision makers, and so on, that things run much smoother, and also for me, much more best value for money. So I think it's a no-brainer, definitely.
Thank you. And Jennifer, just building on that question, how can we ensure that the quality of new places is sustained in the longer term?
Well, so I think we've got some great examples now, sort of coming up in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which I think are good illustrations of this. And I think I'd like to mention first, directly to that point, the new Fens Reservoir, which I'm not sure that anyone will yet know much about unless they live near Chatteris or March. There, the conundrum is flooding a great area of countryside. Now, you could have a load of concrete and some mown grass and not much biodiversity, but there, the local authorities have taken an absolute decision to take a landscape-led approach to placemaking and make a sort of varied and rich experience for visitors, make it a destination that people want to visit again and again. And they hope to, by doing that, unlock sort of further investment from third parties, unregulated parties, to really fund this, and the visitor revenues to help support the 200 plus hectares of new wetland and a variety of landscapes there. And I think that would not only ease the long-term pressure on bill payers, but it also is going to increase the access of local communities to outdoors, increased diversity. It's really going to help one of the more deprived boroughs in the area, in the region, to really have a level of amenity that they haven't had before. And I just think that is a really fantastic way, even without talking about house building or anything like that, in this to really create some value for the future. And I think it's a terribly ambitious project which has shown a lot of foresight by the people involved. We have more examples, but we could carry on.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Just again, building on that question, what sort of mechanisms of stewardship can we put in place to ensure that quality can be sustained? So we've achieved good design through the infrastructure that we put in, the green infrastructure. How do we make sure that lasts?
I think that is one of the potential challenges and barriers within some of the work that we've been doing to support developers to make sure they do put in that high level quality design and the kind of scope and scale of important green space. We're obviously going through a bit of a change at the moment around there having been less appetite for adoption for some of the spaces by local authorities. I think now there's a bit more of a sense of understanding the importance of this. We have our own mechanisms on strategic sites to look at kind of stewardship bodies that are there, supported by kind of service charge and other kind of approaches that bring in income on an ongoing basis. And obviously with I think, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has been thought leading in some of the BNG approaches, both through policy, but also trialling different things and really focusing on-site delivery rather than off-site mitigation. So I think there's a real desire to make sure that we're looking at spaces that are well looked after. I have to say, we've been a bit nervous about some of the discussions about at national level about kind of leasehold, fleecehold conversations getting slightly confused with service charge and long-term stewardship bodies. So that's something we're a little bit anxious about. But the BNG obligations and requirements are such that, these spaces that are coming forward need good management plans and making sure that they are delivered at that scale and on an ongoing basis key. I would say linked to that, involving the community, we've spoken quite a lot about governance and technical consultants and making sure everything's sort of upstream in that, but actually community engagement is really key. Making sure that a local community moving into spaces or living around them are passionate about the wildflower meadows, are caring about the woodland, whether it's ancient woodland or new woodland, is quite key to making sure that those management plans are robust and are in place and continue to be delivered, even once a house builder or a developer has moved on.
And so how can we ensure that landscape-led regeneration builds stronger public support from the outset on developments of this sort of scale?
So I think alongside a landscape-led approach from the outset, you also need to think about stewardship from the very, very outset as well. And you need to engage with stewardship partners who can come in and tell you at the beginning what to do and what not to do, how to avoid longer-term management and maintenance costs. But as Rebecca said, a really key part of that is community engagement from the outset. But it's not only at the outset, it's making sure you've got community development officers that can work alongside the community, get them engaged in events as the community is developing and progressing, actively encourage them to take ownership of the open spaces, because open spaces are not just about kicking a football around. That's a really important part of it, but more importantly, I guess, is connecting communities existing and new as well. So I think it's about making sure that the community are engaged throughout and that they're empowered and can take ownership, not necessarily sitting on stewardship bodies, but they're a really active and engaged way of there's an actually active engagement through that process. And I think the other thing for me is about when you look at stewardship, it's thinking about it in the round and in a really holistic way, actually managing a site on a holistic basis, because once that site, particularly large scale developments have developed out 10 years time, those residents don't care where the house builder boundaries are. But yet in many legacy schemes, we are left with a stewardship approach that as subdivided communities. So our approach to stewardship is really think holistically, think across the whole site, think about how one thing can generate value that something else might cost, and you can do those offsetting and engage the community all the way throughout.
Okay, thank you. And Carolin, do you think there's a role for the communities in that design from that early stage?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about co-creation. So as chartered landscape architects, we do community sessions right from the start to make sure there is as much as possible, synergy with the project to move on in a sense. The problem is often with new housing, you don't actually have a community. You deal with the sort of community around or wider. So it's often a good guess. And I always don't really like master plans, which are sort of like, this is it, very static in a way. And yes, the developer cannot necessarily develop everything in one go, but I think there should be always, spaces set aside that maybe there could be a community hall being built or extended in future, and other things happening in play areas and so on. So, community is really important, but also we talked just now also about management. You need to also work out whether there are community leaders, champions you can make use of, as much as also understanding is that the community itself cannot necessarily do the management of sites. You need what I call professional volunteers who understand, how things are, compliance and all these things. It's a really heavy subject, health and safety and so on. So it needs to be supplemented by the local authorities and so on. But the main thing is really for me to find the funding for green spaces, and I've managed green spaces and it's really costly. If you start actually sort of working out what it costs to manage a green space. So I used to look after, for example, Wanderbury Country Park, and 15 years ago it cost something like £400 a day to look after the park. Probably now we're talking £1,000 minimum, absolute minimum. And that is a lot of money, and you can't always supplement it with volunteers. And I always talk about, some people love to volunteer when it's nice and sunny and it's tree planting, but if it's less sexy maintenance operations, they will not come out. So we need to be quite realistic about this. And for me, it is with development, you need to bring in also some sort of endowment, if you can, to really supplement and make developments really happen. And that's always for me the difficult bit in development, and also working with the local authorities and so on, that maybe a developer can build a little bit more, and as part of that actually give an asset which then generates income for a charity or the relevant management organizations to help looking after the spaces. When you look at budgets, local authorities, and even Cambridge has for green spaces, it's a joke. It's an absolute joke. You're talking something like £15,000 for replacement planting for a whole city. And we are tackling now also climate change issues. Yeah, we're talking, one of the driest spaces or areas in Northern Europe, as dry or drier than Barcelona. The climate will be like Nantes. Yeah, so it's serious. We actually have more problems coming ahead. So we really need to start looking after our green infrastructure, planting large trees, planting, a lot of more greenery to actually create livable environments. Because cooling, with electricity in apartments and so on is hugely costly. If landscape can deliver some of this for you, you save money. And we are now also in an economic cycle which is not beneficial, and who knows, it might take 10, 20 years before we actually see more move. Cambridge is vibrant in many ways, but it's still not that vibrant, and we need to really ensure that we look positively forward, and that plan more efficiently right from the start using the landscape-led approach.
Thanks, Carolin. Sarah?
I think one of the challenges we face as an industry is we talk a lot about the cost of these things, and actually it's the value it generates, isn't it? Not only for the economy but for our health and well-being. And there is extensive research out there now that shows we save costs to the NHS, it combats loneliness, just being outdoors in nature can reduce stress. And I don't think we capture that enough early on, because I think if we did capture that value in a monetised way, and we've done quite a lot of work as an agency around that, but if generally the industry captured that in a monetised way from the outset, it would substantially change the way that we can deliver some of these schemes.
Yeah.
Just support that by saying that the most successful projects that we do and have done have had the subject, the grisly subjects of long-term maintenance right up there, front and centre, alongside the narrative and design and visioning, and they get talked about at the same time. You bring those subjects along together so that by the time you've got a vision and a narrative that people are starting to buy into, once you're starting to get to the consenting stage, you've also got, to use a grand term, a legacy plan if it's a huge project, but a plan for the various ways in which it could be funded. It may not be the final plan, but at least it's in people's consciousness as what they're walking into if you choose that route. And I do think the opening of discussion, it is surprising the people that come forward and the funding routes and the investment, as I mentioned earlier, non-infrastructure or non sort of third-party investors who see destination potentials. As long as you articulate it up front and communicate it and can describe it, I think that's part of the problem when you create space on a master plan and have no plan for how it's going to be managed or looked after. That's where the problems come.
Thank you. Which leads us into the next question. Maybe Rebecca, you want to start on this one. What, from your perspective, are the biggest barriers to delivering landscape-led schemes at scale?
Well, I might not be the best person to answer that because that is the principal place that we start. I think to do it, you have to be looking at super strategic sites or big sites that can support that delivery. And you also have to be working in a kind of pro-growth environment. So I think we have been hugely lucky. One of the reasons we invest so much in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, I guess, is because we've had such support from local authority partners, but also from partners like the Wildlife Trust, from Natural Cambridgeshire, the local nature recovery strategy being a very collaborative thing. I think it does require, apologies for the use of the word, but it requires an ecosystem around it that means it's not just the developer going, this is our vision. Actually, your partners locally, as well as your technical team, will keep you true to being able to do that. Clearly, there is a sense, I think, that there is an upfront cost to delivering landscape-led. Now, our experience has been a bit like other colleagues have spoken about, that actually in really investing in the existing landscape and thinking carefully about kind of regenerative farming practices alongside more traditional landscape delivery, there are ways in which you can actually really cut costs. And also, we've obviously relied very closely on our partnership working with Homes England to ensure that early infrastructure loans enable you to look at a larger area of landscaping and infrastructure than you would otherwise be able to do if you were just relying on a quick return. So I think actually there are a lot of the mechanisms out there that recognise those barriers and have set in place things to overcome them. So I don't think there's many excuses, but I think we need to get out there to promote the fact that this isn't harder. It is in many ways easier. It certainly takes the community with you and takes key partners and stakeholders with you. So it unlocks a lot of the things that can make development hard. So that's partly why we're a bit of on a campaign to make sure that more developers do think about it as their starting point rather than something that they feel is foisted on them by regulation.
Thank you. And Carolin, in terms of the resources and expertise and skills that we need to support this level of investment in the landscape, what's your view on that? Are we in a good position?
Yeah, this is, I think, what I hear is everywhere. All the professions and consultants, which we need to involve in creating amazing places and landscapes. There are not enough consultants and specialists really around. So we have an under provision of landscape or chartered landscape architects, but so are the people who look after it. You can't find enough rangers or green space managers and so on. So we are working very closely with lots of different colleges and universities trying to bring that forward. It's also an outfall of Brexit. A lot of international students were brought over. I'm probably one of them, but I just came here accidentally more than anything. But it's sort of also reconfiguring and also showing people that actually being part of this sort of industry, creating new homes, whatever part of the work strands we need to deliver is really exciting. So yes, we're not in the best place, and we need to do much more.
Okay, Jennifer.
I think this is the real crux of it. How do you get how do you get this sort of virtuous circle moving of the ideas and the narrative right up front, so that it creates certainty and understanding and unlocks bigger investment. And I was fascinated to hear somebody talking this morning, an investor, saying that investors don't like investing small amounts at high risk at the beginning. They'd rather they could see something, and they'd rather invest in something bigger further down the track, that they're more certain of a return. And I think this subject really falls into that trap, because I work as an RBA client advisor in local authority teams where they don't have the expertise, and they're trying to find out how to unlock really quite ambitious projects. And it's so hard to generate the funding to appoint the brains that Carolin talking about, to just get quite small pieces of work done that starts that whole machine moving. And certainly from the architect's point of view, the RIBA's launched an initiative they call City Architects. So it's more about getting design expertise into local authorities, not to design, but to actually be the commissioning agents to start this, to know how to start to get this process started. And I think there's relatively small amounts of money can unlock quite a lot, but it's money that's very difficult to get. So I think I see that as the barrier. It's that thing that just start getting the right brains in the right places to start something going. You don't have the problem in the maybe some of the devolved organisations like Cambridge and Peterborough, who have that vision, and they have developers around like Urban and Civic. But all over the country, there are local authorities that don't have that expertise. They're flying on fumes. They have, it's a big deal to hire somebody like me for half a day a month to have an idea as how to move something forward. So for me, that's the thing that is probably preventing the landscape-led approach.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think, as well as the cost, which we've already spoken about, I think there's something about treating landscape in a siloed way alongside providing a road. And I think the more we can do to integrate landscape, the easier it becomes. And I was just reflecting, actually, as we were listening to speakers talk then, one of the things that we've done is introduce an outcomes-led approach. So we now look at how to create healthy, resilient and inclusive places and homes, which embed nature, climate, movement, character. There's 9 outcomes that we're working towards, and although one of them, not one specifically says landscape, you cannot deliver against any of those 9 outcomes without considering the landscape. So I'm an architect. I was an architect a long time ago. I learned that buildings were really, really important. And actually, I'm on a mission now to say it's the spaces between buildings that are more important. They're the things where you get community interaction and engagement and health and wellbeing benefits. But the only way you can do that and encourage other disciplines to do that is think in a rounded way, make it easy for them to think about landscape. So the way we do it, we don't even, people don't realise they're thinking about landscape. They're thinking about how to reduce carbon emissions or how to increase nature in a certain way.
Thank you. There was a little bit of discussion at the beginning around nature. Landscape is the relationship between nature, people and place. There's sometimes, when you're trying to develop at large scale, a conflict between two of those things, particularly people and nature. Our idea is to bring the two together, but when you've got sensitive conservation sites, for example, that can be challenging. Rebecca, have you got any views or insights on that from your work on?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it is around the kind of, I think this is something that's really important for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It has such unique landscapes in terms of whether it's the fenland areas or agricultural areas, or whether it's the green spaces within or around market towns. The value that everybody has and the passion they have for those is key. One of the things we always talk about at consultations is that everyone makes noise about traffic, but the passion is about the green spaces. So I think for us, partly it's about kind of spatial planning, whether that's local planning or the new spatial development strategies, making sure that some of those areas that are really important are protected from development, but also that it isn't something that pitches everything for or against, that actually the ability to design around these important assets and places to be part of those kind of core Lawton principles around using development and new spaces to connect some of those historic areas is quite key. I think that's where that vision point matters. And the only thing I sort of slightly say, just to make sure that cost isn't always a barrier to thinking about this. One of the things we did at Auchenbury and at Waterbeach was actually really get local partners together early on to do some of that visioning. So yes, you might need your technical landscape architect team, but also there's so much information already out there. There's every single green infrastructure strategy back from the kind of 80s, particularly for old Cambridge Horizon stuff, Cambridge Head. There is a lot of background work, background knowledge, and you really get a strong sense there about what does matter for the local communities, but also for the kind of core priorities for nature. And I think we've never necessarily found it an issue to design in around that and make sure that you're using the right spaces in good spatial planning principles. That doesn't mean it's always rosy. There are areas where things get difficult. Same with heritage. Similar. It's not all about. It isn't always. It is that same point around just trying to be sensitive to those assets and design them into places rather than work against them. And that sort of partnership is quite key to getting the right balance. And if you get that right balance, then communities will go along with it. Your stakeholder planning partners go along with it because it is part of a kind of shared vision for strategic spaces.
Thank you. And Carolin, what's your view on that from a perspective of cultural landscapes in and around Cambridge and the wider landscape?
That's a very long topic. I think very quickly, I think we also should now think that people don't live just in a 2-story building or such. I'm just judging the Housing and Design Awards, and we're talking really high-rise in lots of places, and also it's coming to Cambridge, or has come to Cambridge, and will come to other places. So people are much more living on smaller spaces with no green space at all immediately around their house or flat. So these external green spaces become even more important, and whether you can go through them or there's what we call borrowed landscape, you can at least look at them, have already such health and well-being sort of qualities. And I think, yes, the nature in Cambridgeshire is absolutely fascinating, and I think we all should be proud of it and actually really cherish it and make more out of it, because we have a very costly lifestyle, and we need nature to provide us, and we need people to actually cherish that the soil nature has as such is our being, it provides our food, it provides our air. We actually, without nature, we wouldn't be all sitting here. And I think people seem to forget that at times, and I think it's so important. And the more we can bring in nature to compensate at least some of the energy use and so on we do, is really more and more important, and whether it's trees and other nature provisions is absolutely fascinating. And as professionals and decision makers or developers or so on, we all really need to play our part, but much more coherently. And there is really special nature in Cambridgeshire, and we need to protect it, and not like a previous government says, we can relocate ancient woodlands. No, you can't. They have lived there for thousands of years. You can't just transplant them. It's a living ecosystem, and we need to cherish that, because you cannot replace them. A 500-year tree you cannot replace tomorrow. And I think it's that sort of challenge. And I'm a designer, and I always feel if there's a hurdle, it's not necessarily for me stopping and thinking, God, I don't take on this job. It's actually a real challenge, and a good designer can overcome it and can deliver really good green spaces which work, which look beautiful, and which look good not just now but also in the future. And that's, I think, what we can do, and only if we are involved early. We're often asked to, at the end of the development, just make something pretty, or we get value engineered. That is one of the biggest crimes, I think. And you end up with this, and I've seen it with the Housing and Design Award, and it's shocking. It's really, really shocking, and it really treats clients, who are the people who live there, as really not as valuable customers. So we really do need to coherently deliver more. And I've talked, for example, to the Peabody Trust in London, and he says, for example, 1% on landscape, on this large-scale development they're doing, they can deliver quality landscape. 1%. And that gets value engineered in other properties and developments. And I think we have our priorities wrong. And whether it's government or not, as professionals, I think we need to deliver, and landowners and such, we need to deliver more, and we have the onus to deliver more. So.
Okay. I'm going to pass over to Jennifer now, and then I'll open up to questions. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, I think what you're all hearing is that this is a really, really hard subject, and I think anybody who works with this sort of conflicting set of parameters there's no easy solutions, and I think one of my colleagues asked me here, so how do you do it? And I just said there is no silver bullet. You just have to try really, really hard. And I think Cambridge South Station, which I think everyone here will be interested in, which is going to open next month, which is very exciting for us, is really a good example. It's sort of partly in the green belt. It's a what we would call a human-centered design project with a focus on environmental care. We've gone for a full biodiversity net gain on site. When I say it's hard, it's quite easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's tempting to offset. We've really pushed the envelope to try and accommodate all the BNG requirements on site, which means there's no further liabilities elsewhere. There are so many parts of a project like this. I mean, infrastructure projects aren't known for their, ease of delivering some of the biodiversity requirements. But I think when you think of a site like this that's sort of sitting between Hobson's Park to the west and fronting the Cambridge campus on the east, you just have to think through it so carefully to work out on balance what is likely to take the community with you, what is likely to take the stakeholders with you, what's the best thing to do. It's such a challenge, but in the end you set your design parameters, and they generally involve keeping ancient woodland, and you set your basic parameters, and then you let the team use its best endeavours and its ingenuity to get the best results. I mean, for Cambridge South, once we established the functional, dynamic, and spatial parameters, the landscape-led principles were driven by the landscape architects, and we'll see what you all think of the result.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take questions from the audience now.
Hello, I'm Katie Hill from Leeds Beckett University, and I'm someone who's moved from a design background and now in the planning department. And what I've heard from several of you this morning is some things about the importance of design and maybe some of the gaps in design expertise. And so I wanted to ask, having started my career in the New Labour era when there was much more prominent national leadership in terms of the Design Council, CABE, and so on, in terms of value of design. Do we need to reinvigorate that national leadership, or is there an opportunity in the devolved leadership in the combined authorities to do what kind of design leadership, and particularly because I'm thinking at that along this timeline as well, in higher education, we're seeing design, student numbers are falling. We're struggling to advocate within higher education institutions for our subject. So just what can we do to get more of that expertise circulating?
Yeah.
We can both do this.
Yes, it's certainly something we at the Landscape Institute are thinking a lot. I've alluded earlier, the international market obviously has dropped off because of Brexit. And yes, the previous Labour government was very strongly on these sort of discussions, because that's what we enjoy, good design. That's why this country is so special, because it has had good design in areas, not for all areas. And I think all of us in various, wherever we work, whether it's a developer or as in various consultancies or such, we all need to do more to showcase that we want design coming back in a way, sponsor apprenticeships. So we, for example, also changed the way we train landscape architects. It's not anymore just going to university. We now have apprenticeships, so people can actually afford to start studying landscape architecture, and we also believe it makes it much more on the EDI side of life, also much more equal to people to become people from different cultural backgrounds, because our dynamics are changing, and we need to make sure we have the right people coming to be designers from different sort of backgrounds and interests. It's a lot of work, but I think we need to also work more closer together. And it's also not just in the sort of design and delivering mechanism, but also on the management side. There are not enough gardeners, there are not enough or horticulturists, there are not enough rangers to look after nature who've got the knowledge. Everybody would love to be a ranger in a way and think it's a lovely job, but it's really taxing and demanding, and you need to have really high knowledge. It's degree knowledge in that sense, and people forget that. So, yeah, I think coherent working is absolutely essential.
Jennifer?
Yes, I mean, that's the you would, as you would expect, the Landscape Institute and the RIBA are coming from some similar places on this. There's actually now some really useful data coming out on the effect of lack of design skills in local authorities. So I've got a couple here that in 2025, 31% of local authorities reported skills gaps in urban design and architecture, and that they needed greater access to design expertise within their organisations, or at least easily on hand. And 60% of respondents to a survey held by Public Practice in 2024 noted a lack of architecture, urban design and master planning skills within their local authority. And what that does across the country is it develops a lack of confidence in the subject, in terms of being able to talk about it, being able to sort of own projects and have the confidence to go out and commission them, which is where I see so to get funding for and commission projects. So from the RIBA side, actually just launching a report at the moment, which is making a case for funding for design expertise to be put back into local authorities. I would commend you all to it, but I think it's much more than just having someone to do a bit of design on the side. It's about getting that conscience of the subject and comfort in the agenda back into the bodies that are effectively commissioning and consenting the sort of projects we're talking about.
We'll go to Sarah and then we'll take any further questions.
Just really quickly, two things I wanted to touch on. I mentioned I was an architect and my education was very siloed. I know that the way that we train built environment specialists has changed now, but there needs to be much more interdisciplinary practices, and Cambridge University do courses, don't they, where there's interdisciplinary practices. The other thing I would say as well, and you touched on this, is design is a process. And I think that's where we lack education. Actually, it's about understanding the decisions that we take and the knock-on and unintended consequences that they have. And we don't actually get taught that design is that process, and it embraces much more than homes, than the landscape. It's everything in between and doing things well. And I think that's something that is maybe lacking a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Just one very quick addition to that. I mean, I appreciate there's lots of challenges at the moment, particularly in the local authority resource point, but I'm really positive about the future and the opportunities. I think how landscape-led comes together with climate resilience, with the importance of health and well-being across every local, national and regional government agency at the moment, I think is a real opportunity. But also we work with schools. We do Make Your Mark with young women to get them into built environment. We do lots of work with colleges and universities. There is so much passion now about the environment, about climate, about how all these things impact on quality of life. I think actually this is a chance where those barriers will be overcome from the bottom up, if not the top down. So I think part of our responsibility is to carry on working with the communities of interest around this, and that will make sure that we kind of get more skilled people into those roles, but also kind of create that energy around this subject locally and nationally.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you. Jo Sainsbury from Arup. This is, I guess, a question to the whole panel. And we've talked quite a lot about green space in specific developments and maybe connecting with some existing communities. I just wondered if the panel had any thoughts about a wider strategic, say, Cambridgeshire, Peterborough area, and how you can link together some of that landscape-led regeneration, but with those very rural areas that are just surrounding us. You have people who can get to rural areas really quickly at the moment that perhaps might become more of an inner city approach. And just the panel's thought on actually how we can look at that strategically and take some of those thoughts forward.
Let's start with Carolin.
Certainly something I thought a lot when I was the CEO of the Cambridge PPF Civic Society, and the city is obviously one of the one of the fastest growing cities in Europe. And we've done a lot of work also with the villages at the time. And actually one of the biggest questions on that was infrastructure and buses and things like that, and creating actually usable infrastructure and having a critical mass in each village to also afford a shop and these sort of things. So a green infrastructure I think is a really nice idea, but what you were really alluding is much more a regional infrastructure and thinking of where the best development pieces are or where the best recreation areas are, the infrastructure should be, and so on. And we used to have it, I think, in the region development. Now we have the mayor of Cambridgeshire and such. That's a little bit coming back. But I always remember now the Fens Growth Triangle and other things, but also, the railway line between Wisbech and such, a really crucial piece missing, and that would unlock so much and bring people in the different places. But getting into the rural areas is really difficult, and also for the historic, visitor attractions like the National Trust and so on, they're all more in rural, and you can't get to them by a bus. It's just not possible. So yes, we need to think about it. But then also greenbelt rules, where, for example, I used to manage a country park and a new one, and I couldn't build a visitor centre where my ranger would live on top to actually look after it. It was specifically prohibited by the South Cambridgeshire local plan at the time. So we need to think about policy making, not just delivering the developments and so on, but also management, and also efficient management. So.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I'll just add in a little bit there. So accepting access to disparate places is a challenge, but even if that access is there, I think the perception of people, of the areas outside where they live, is very affected by sort of narrative. There's lots of reasons that you wouldn't know a particular pocket park or a particular place was there until somebody told you. And what I've been really struck with is how certain schemes about bits of landscape that actually have no relationship with each other at all in reality have come to the public attention and therefore get interested in them just because they're part of a bigger narrative. And I do think, regardless of whether or not people can get to them, and I accept that's a problem, when you look at the sort of legacy narrative that's grown up around the tideway sites, 24 sites, they have absolutely nothing in common, frankly. And there's no reason anybody in Acton would want to would ever normally think of going to Queen Elizabeth Memorial Park, and yet the narrative is starting and people are moving up and down that system. And I think the Capital Ring is probably a good example. Lots of in London, lots of just green spaces joined together by really sometimes quite marginal footpaths and routes. So I do wonder whether part of the solution to that is compelling narrative. We talked about having architects and landscape architects up front. That's mostly because they're good storytellers, and actually you can make good stories and get people to start believing in them and following them. So I think that's possibly part of the answer.
We've got time for one final quick question, if anybody has anything burning to ask our panellists. Otherwise, I'll take that question back to Sarah and Rebecca. One more, thanks.
Hi, I'm Alison Baxter. I'm a landscape architect. I sit in meetings where clients are landscape-led approach and everything else, and then in reality it's quite different. How do we get landscape architects at the top table?
Rebecca, would you like to pick that one up?
Can I start with that one?
Sorry.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah, please.
Oh no, go.
I mean, this has been quite an interesting conversation, isn't it, around the role of design teams and the role of national government. I think part of our experience has been that, things, it almost goes back to the previous question, some of those aspects around the principles that are set out in a local plan, some of the opportunities around the spatial development strategies that combined authorities are going to take forward, it is around embedding landscape-led for an area. My personal view is that, obviously I work more locally than a lot of the other panel members, but Cambridgeshire and Peterborough have worked really hard to do that, and therefore as a developer who wants to move forward applications, wants to take the community with you, doesn't want to go to appeal, that is where you start, and therefore you bring in a landscape architect early. I think it's quite hard to do it in any other way. So I think for me, there's a lot about the policy infrastructure that sits there. I think one of the other things that both the Combined Authority and the County Council and District Councils have done in Cambridgeshire is really look at community grant funding. There's this big scheme that's launching called Nature from the Ground Up, which is all around empowering communities to understand what is important in habitats and species locally. So it is around this ecosystem. It's genuinely around co-creation, and therefore any developer is going to say, I need my top team to have a really good landscape or ecology understanding to be able to progress planning in this area. I think without that, it makes it hard, but that's why local government devolved authorities are really key to that, because if it sits nationally and doesn't sit locally, there is a gap, whereas actually I think that the kind of partnership that sits around it is the way forward that we need to kind of build going forward.
Thank you. Well, we're just about out of time, so I'll go to Jennifer and then we'll wrap up.
Oh, I just wanted to say that that in areas where this kind of approach that Rebecca has described is not well known or well bedded in, let's call it in less enlightened local authority areas, I think architects and landscape architects both, I'd make the same criticism. We have to be advocates for the outcomes that we can create. Designers, arguably can be quite forthcoming, but often are not going to be the people that naturally go out and sell their worth. I wouldn't say their services. I would just say that all landscape architects need to get out there and describe the projects that we've been talking today and show where they can add value as well. A little bit of getting out of the comfort zone.
Thank you very much.
Maybe let's use some case studies to bring that to life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so for me, obviously, landscape-led means really being out there right from the start. And we have the European Landscape Convention, and actually landscape is defined, everything you see in a landscape, that's architecture, it's infrastructure, and it's such. And if you're wondering, EU, yes, we're still part of it, because it's been done by the European Council. And we haven't removed ourselves from the European Council yet. I hope we won't. But it's really important for me, I think, to get landscape architects in, and we're launching tomorrow results from a Ipsos poll, and it basically says that 3/4 of people wanting to live somewhere want actually green space. So naturally, we as a specialist on green space delivery, and you should have chartered landscape architects as part of it.
Thank you very much. We're out of time, but thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. The panelists will stick around for a few minutes if you want to ask any further questions. Thanks again for your questions. I'm sorry to say it does look like it's raining outside now. You might want to hang around a bit longer anyway. Thank you very much.